Prabhu's text 92. This chapter is entitled Lord Caitanya and 5 Features, I think it is. Nacha gao bhakta sanghe kara sankirtan. Krishna nama upadeshi tarasavajana. Nacho gao bhakta sanghe kara sankirtan. Krishna nama upadeshi tarasavajana. Nacha gao bhakta sanghe kara sankirtan. Krishna nama upadeshi tarasavajana. Nacha, go on dancing. Gao, chant. Bhakta Sanghe, in the society of devotees. Kara, continue. Sankirtan, chanting the holy names in assembly. Krishna Nam, the holy name of Krishna. Upadeshi, by instructing. Tara, deliver. Savajana, all fallen souls. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Translation: my dear child, this is Ishwarapuri speaking, or Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is speaking, relaying what his spiritual master said to him. My dear child, continue dancing, chanting and performing Sankirtan in association with devotees. Furthermore, go out and preach the value of chanting Krishna Nam, for by this process you will be able to deliver all fallen souls. Repeatedly, my dear child, continue dancing, chanting and performing Sankirtan in association with devotees. Furthermore, go out and preach the value of chanting Krishna Nam, for by this process you will be able to deliver all fallen souls. Purport: it is another ambition of the spiritual master to see his disciples not only chant, dance and follow the regulated principles, but also preach the Sankirtan movement to others in order to deliver them. For the Krishna consciousness movement is based on the principle that one should become as perfect as possible in devotional service, oneself, and also preach the cult for others' benefit. There are 2 classes of unalloyed devotees, namely Goshtya Anandis and Bhajan Anandis. Bhajan Anandis refers to one who is satisfied to cultivate devotional service for himself, and Goshtya Anandi is one who is not satisfied simply to become perfect himself, but wants to see others also take advantage of the holy name of the Lord and advance in spiritual life. The outstanding example is Prahlad Maharaj. When he was offered a benediction by Lord Nrsimhadev, Prahlad Maharaj said, quote, "My dear Lord, I have no problems and want no benediction from you because I am quite satisfied to chant your holy name. This is sufficient for me because even when I chant, the word missing in this, because even when I chant, I immediately merge in an ocean of transcendental bliss. I only lament to see others bereft of your love. They are rotting in material activities for transient material pleasure and spoiling their lives, toiling all day and night simply for sense gratification with no attachment for love of Godhead. I'm simply lamenting for them and devising various plans to deliver them from the clutches of Maya." End of quote. That was Bhagavatam 7.943. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur explains in his Anubhashya, quote, "A person who has attracted the attention of the spiritual master by his sincere service likes to dance and chant with similarly developed Krishna conscious devotees. The spiritual master authorizes such a devotee to deliver fallen souls in all parts of the world. Those who are not advanced prefer to chant the Hare Krishna mantra in a solitary place." End of quote. Such activities constitute, in the language of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, a type of cheating process, in the sense that they imitate the activities of exalted personalities like Haridas Thakur. One should not attempt to imitate such exalted devotees. Rather, everyone should endeavour to preach the cult of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu in all parts of the world and thus become successful in spiritual life. One who is not very expert in preaching may chant in a secluded place, avoiding bad association, but for one who is actually advanced, preaching and meeting people who are not engaged in devotional service are not disadvantages. A devotee gives the non-devotees his association, but is not affected by their misbehaviour. Thus, by the activities of a pure devotee, even those who are bereft of the love of Godhead get a chance to become devotees of the Lord one day. In this connection, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur advises that one discuss the verse in Srimad Bhagavatam, Naitad Samatsaraj Chatu Manasapi Enavishvara 10:33-31, and the following verse in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Anasakta Sivishayam Atam Upayam Jata Dimbanda Krishna Sambade Yukta Raragyam Uchate. This is 1-255 of the Nectar Devotion. One should not imitate the activities of great personalities. One should be detached from material enjoyment and should accept everything in connection with Krishna's service. Translation again. My dear child, continue dancing, chanting and performing Sankirtan in association with devotees. Furthermore, go out and preach the value of chanting Krishna Nam. For by this process you will be able to deliver all fallen souls. Amma Gana Timirandasya Ganam Ganam Salakaya Sakshusu Militam Jena Tasmaya Shri Guruve Namaha Panchakalpatarubhisya Kripa Sindhuva Evacha Patitanam Pavanibhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha. So this is a extremely significant verse in one sense. This is Caitanya Mahaprabhu in this chapter, in this particular section, is in the assembly, like we've been hearing, the assembly of the Mayavadis, headed by Prakashananda Saraswati. And Prakashananda Saraswati just earlier asked him, why are you doing this chanting? Why are you carrying on and dancing and chanting and associating with, mad people? As we said to him, it's, you should be like us. You're a sannyasi in our line, and you should be studying Vedanta and meditating, not carrying on like a fool. So he inquired from him. So Caitanya Mahaprabhu has spent a whole bunch of verses we've been hearing over, I guess, the last couple of months on the exalted, the instructions he received on chanting the holy name from his spiritual master. The conversation we're hearing now that Caitanya Mahaprabhu is relaying happened in Gaya, just after the time of Caitanya Mahaprabhu's initiation. Just before that, he was engaged as a scholar in his Vidya Leela, enjoying being a very learned scholar and causing all sorts of havoc. Especially the devotees were finding it very difficult to deal with him. They were thinking, if he ever became a devotee, he'd be so good. Because he was such a powerful debater and he had so much knowledge. But his spiritual master said to him, you shouldn't be studying Vedanta, you're a fool. Just chant Hare Krishna. This is what you have to do. And now we know Caitanya Mahaprabhu is not a fool. He's Krishna himself, non-different, the actual Supreme Person, manifesting directly himself as a bhakta avatar. And but this is the lesson for the men of this age, that we're all fools. We shouldn't be, and you won't progress by simply studying Vedanta, becoming a learned scholar, having your head buried in books or learning so many mantras. Just chant this holy name, and Caitanya Mahaprabhu specifically has come to inaugurate this Yuga Dharma, this process for this age. And it's interesting, when I was reading this verse, it's very significant actually, because you could say this instruction coming from Ishvara Puri, the spiritual master of Caitanya Mahaprabhu, this very moment when he says, furthermore, go out and preach the value of chanting Krishna Nam. By this process you will be able to deliver fallen souls. This is actually, you could argue, is the inauguration of the Sankirtan movement, that very instruction. Because before that, Caitanya Mahaprabhu his purpose was hidden, you could say. He was absorbed in his Vidya Leela, enjoying himself. But now he's taken up his mission for this particular incarnation, for this age. And Prabhupada talks about the two types of different devotees in this purport, the Bhajanandis and the Gosjanandis. The Bhajanandis, he says they're both unalloyed devotees. That's one thing he does say. So we respect all devotees, but just a different mood. The Bhajanandis, they like to fully become absorbed themselves and don't want to be involved in the material world. They don't even preach. But they will preach if an opportunity comes along. Our greatest example is Gorkishore Das Babaji. He's the spiritual master of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, who's the spiritual master of Srila Prabhupada. He was a Bhajanandi. He was there sitting under boats in latrines and all sorts of strange places, trying to get away from everybody. But at one point he saw the condition in Navadvip, which is a very sacred hole that was becoming externally very degraded. He actually got himself shaved up and got himself tidied up. Got himself a dhoti from, I think it was a Shantipur dhoti, very puckered dhoti, and he attempted to preach, but there was no result. Nobody was interested. So he went back to, drew his beard back out, went back out and performed. But he was able. But he was the greatest inspiration for Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, who was the most powerful Gosjanandi devotee that we know. Him and his disciple Srila Prabhupada. There's no other greater preachers in this current period of time. They went out and preached. So the preaching is quite an interesting term. I mean, I think it's a term that's been borrowed from the Christians, maybe. Go out and preach and swing their Bible around. But it's a little bit more involved than just that, or even banging people with the Bhagavad Gita. Preaching really means sharing. Like he says here, we've been given. A dear child, continue dancing and chanting and share it. So you're experiencing something wonderful yourself, but don't be a miser. Give it to everyone else. It's like running up to the Mahaprasad and grabbing the tray and run off around the corner. Or mine. No, it's much more pleasant to share. So especially you taste something really wonderful and you go, wow, try this thing. You want to see the pleasure that others receive from what you're experiencing. So this is the preaching consciousness. So I can remember years ago we were fortunate enough to when we were brahmacharis, to collect for the construction of the Rajpur temple in Mayapur for Lord Jagannath. Some or other that us and the German devotees, and then at one Mayapur festival we were secretly invited for a special feast for these devotees that were involved in collecting, and we were put in a little prasadam hall, and still to this day it was the most extraordinary prasadam I've ever had in my whole life. It was so far out. Every preparation you go, whoa. And you turn next to the devotee next to you, you got to try this, You got to try. It was just amazing Jagannath Prasadam. I guess it was special mercy for the Lord. He was kindly reciprocating with us for whatever tiny service we did. Yeah, so you take so much more pleasure in that environment and sharing. So the whole Krishna conscious movement is designed for sharing our great fortune with others. If you actually, everything what we do. Our restaurants, our farms, our temples, the devotees going down Harinam, book distribution. It's a way to show appreciation to our own spiritual master for giving us this great gift. And instructions are given there, and Caitanya Mahaprabhu has led the way, and all those that follow in his line also doing the same thing. Funny enough, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said the best devotee is Bhajanandi, the preachers. So in other words, it's important that we become spiritually convinced and fixed and absorbed. Prabhupada says in the purport, so when you go and meet non-devotees that absorb in sinful activity, he uses the word, you don't become disadvantaged or polluted in such a way that when you start thinking, boy, I wouldn't mind a car like that, or a girl like that, or that house, or start thinking, God, these guys have got it pretty good. I just got these beads and get up early and do all this stuff. These guys are really... So you're not affected in that way by the material energy. You see it for what it is. And to preach, we've got to understand what is that we're doing to people is we're creating an opportunity for them to understand their real selves. Because at the moment people think they're the body, the gross material body. And Krishna says these gross elements, the earth, water, fire, ether, mind, he says these are my separated material energies, these Prakriti. And he says in the next verse there's a higher Prakriti again, an energy of mind, which is the living entities, the souls. So there's two different energies. People think it's just the one thing, the material thing, or the body, or the mind, which is a bit more subtle. But Krishna says even the subtle body, that's my material energy, separate my energy, and says it's our energy, says it's his. We tend to want to take it for ourselves. And then he says, but there's a high energy. And Krishna himself is different than those two energies. He's the energetic. He's the Purush, the enjoyer. These energies, be they material objects or spirit souls, are there for his enjoyment. And the problem with the living entities is they reverse that role. They try and become the Purush, the controller, the enjoyer of other entities and of all the gross elements and subtle elements. And then that's when their suffering begins. We start to begin to suffer when we act in a different way. And we use very simple examples. We see if you take a fish out of water, you can, give it a massage, stick it on a throne, cook a big buffet for him, whatever you like. He's just not going to be happy because it's not his constitutional nature. He's actually a fish. He needs to be in the water. So we're living entities, and constitutionally we're servants. That's our eternal dharma. Like sometimes we talk about, Prabhupada speaks about this a lot. Religion is he says, is a kind of faith, because you can be a Christian today, and tomorrow you can become a Muslim, and then next week you can become a Hindu, and then you can go back again if you like, or you can just reject it all, based on faith or association. But this constitutional nature to serve, that you can't change. It's just the nature of what you serve may vary depending on your realization. So the soul by nature is constitutionally a servant, and ultimately in our pure state we're a servant of Krishna, of God, and that's the only way we're going to be happy, when we return to that natural condition. So when we preach, one of the best examples of preaching is you've got to give people a higher taste. I did a course in Mayapur years ago. They used to do courses at festival time. You can sign up after breakfast. You can do. I did 3 at that time. I did one Bhakti Chari Swami, the late Bhakti Chari Swami, on the position of Srila Prabhupada, the founder Acharya. It was so wonderful. I did one with Sridhar Swami, again the late Sridhar Swami. So grateful I was able to get that association, because they're no longer with us, those devotees on Lord Nrsingadev, and that was extraordinary over 4 days. And I did one with Satchidananda Maharaj on preaching. And the gist of that preaching seminar at the end of the day says, when you preach or share Krishna consciousness with others, ultimately you've got to give them, they have to receive some sort of a higher taste. There's got to be a contrast in what you're giving them, in whatever form you give it to them, that it's better than what they have, or they experience something higher. And there's a verse in the Gita, Vishaya Vinivantate, that one finishes Param Ditsvanivatate. When Arjuna is inquiring from Krishna, Krishna has been speaking to Arjuna about the wonders of devotional service and bhakti, and Arjuna asked him, well, what does such a person look like? How do they walk? How do they talk? He was interested. And Krishna, and one of those verses, that 259 Gita says that such a person that's engaged in higher transcendence, it's beyond material sense gratification. He's fixed in that consciousness because he's experiencing a higher taste. So the lower taste of material sense gratification, it's like if you were in prison and every day for years and years they give you stale bread and water, and that's what you have. And after a while you get accustomed to it, you start looking forward to your stale bread and water, because that's all you know. But one day someone comes in with a beautiful feast with pakoras and samosas and curd sabjis, and all your favourite preparations are there beyond your dreams, and they give it to you. Now, how much more pleasurable is that going to be than the stale bread? Are you going to want to hang on to your bread and stale bread, or are you going to be satisfied with the feast? Automatically you become. So this is preaching, is people have to experience a higher taste. Now, this concept of the Purush and Prakriti, if you want to translate that into English, Purush, supreme enjoyer, Prakriti, to be enjoyed, or primary enjoyer and secondary enjoyer. Right? So our problem in the material world, we try and become primary enjoyers. We brush Krishna aside, and all for me, we want to become the centre, and that's it. We become unhappy again because it's not our natural constitutional position. So if you think of the ways we preach, one of the most effective ways that we preach or share Krishna consciousness is to distribute the prasadam. And it was specifically requested by, I think, Srila Prabhupada for this place where Malacha Desh, these Aussies, they give them prasadam. They need it. And what happens technically when you have prashadam, if you ever think? You put people in a position from primary enjoyer to secondary enjoyer, because they're actually eating the remnants of the Lord. So now when you eat someone else's remnants, that someone else has already enjoyed the food before you. So from a gross material point of view, that's gross. To eat the remnants of someone's leftovers, unless it's somebody that you like, or mothers like to eat their babies' leftovers, but I find that gross too. You dribble that off from all their mouth and spat out, and the mum scoop it up and eat it. But anyway, that's love, I guess, unconditional love. But preaching, we're knowingly or unknowingly putting people from, taking them away from being a primary enjoyer into a secondary enjoyer. And what happens when they go back to their natural position? They become happy. They enjoy so much more, isn't it? Than if they've eaten that food, cooked it for themselves, and ate it without offering it. As soon as they put Krishna as a primary enjoyer, re-establish themselves in their normal state and consider Krishna and offer him, he's my Lord, I want you to enjoy this meal, I cooked it for you. I put the best ingredients I could gather, best consciousness I could gather, and out of my little love, whatever I can put together, my little bhakti, I'm offering you that. And then when you take the remnants, and his kind doesn't eat it all, he eats it all, but it leaves us a plate full at the same time. It's quite extraordinary. Sometimes in Caitanya Lila he does eat it all. It would happen sometimes, it would disappear. When Mother Sachi would cook for him. Caitanya Mahaprabhu would be in Jagannath Puri, she would cook this offering for a little nimai, saturated with so much praying that it would draw Caitanya Mahaprabhu to that place, and he would devour this offering. And then she would say, maybe I didn't cook it, she'd go and cook it again. So that's, and when it says that's one of the three places where Caitanya Mahaprabhu will always be, where Sachimata cooks for him. I think Raghava Pandit's another one that he's cooking, Raghava Pandit. And when Nityananda Prabhu dances, these are the places where Caitanya Mahaprabhu will always manifest. He's very attracted by these personalities and their devotional service. So preaching that's what we do. We create opportunities for people to experience a higher taste. They come in and do service, which normally they wouldn't do, and they're doing it to please the Lord, knowingly or unknowingly, and they become happy. They don't know why they become happy, but that's because they've been constitutionally been re-established. And that's the purpose of the Krishna conscious movement. And the process is given here is primarily this chanting, distributing this chanting. Again, which devotees are chanting and dancing at all sorts of hours of the morning. No one does that, Usually people at 4:30 in the morning are staggering back from the clubs, totally intoxicated. And the only reason they were dancing is they were intoxicated. Otherwise they wouldn't dance. There'd be no reason to dance, But devotees, we're totally sober and totally alert. We don't have breathalyzers at the door when you come in. Right? Everyone's sober, but there's joy in dancing. And even if you don't feel like it, because that's mentioned here, it's done in the association of devotees, automatically it becomes contagious and pleasurable. So Krishna consciousness is the natural state of the living entity, Nitya Siddha Krishna Prem. Pure love for Krishna is established in the heart of all living entities. And Chaitanya, when he's speaking to Sanatana Goswami, he says it's not something that you'd be gained from somewhere else. It's sitting in there in our hearts. And just through association, taking up the authorized process of this Nam Sankirtan, and this is the exact moment when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was instructed in Gaya by his spiritual master. He's relaying that story. He's received the holy name, and he started chanting under the instructions of his guru, and he became a bit mad. He started dancing and rolling and crying, and he didn't know what was going on. And as a disciple should do, he went and confirmed with his spiritual master, went and inquired, why is this happening to me? And his spiritual master was very pleased that you could see he made very rapid advancement, because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the Supreme Lord in the guise of a devotee, so he very quickly became situated on the topmost platform. I think it mentions he reached Bhav pretty much instantly. He was experiencing the symptoms of very high Bhav, which is a high love for Krishna. And then he went back to Navadvip, and he got it all cranking. Sankirtan movement officially took off, first in a concentrated away in the house of Srivas, in the nighttime kirtans. But eventually they took it out to the streets and distributed it to everybody. Very, very wonderful. And Srila Prabhupada is so much in line. If you look at the way he preached, he did the same thing. Because in this conversation, we're up to the point where Caitanya Mahaprabhu is discussing the glories of the holy name and how he was instructed. His spiritual master gave him that famous mantra also in this meeting, Gaya, Harinama, Harinama Navekaya Valam, that in this age of Kali there's no other way, there's no other way but to chant, to chant, to chant. It's actually the God-given process for making spiritual advancement. And the spiritual advancement that's offered, this is explained earlier on in chapter, I guess, 3, the external reasons for Caitanya Mahaprabhu's appearance, is Caitanya Mahaprabhu, yes, he wanted to distribute the Yuga Dharma, the process ideal for this age, but he also wanted to distribute a particular type of perfection that's not normally available. And this is very wonderfully relayed by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami in his earlier chapters. He was able to, he's telling us, he's explaining the mind of the Lord 5,000 years ago. Because when he came 5,000 years ago, it coincided with also Lord Vishnu having to come for his duties of balancing the affairs of the universe. There was some too many unruly kshatriyas, demoniac kshatriyas on this planet that were going to cause a lot of problems. So he was requested by the demigods. But at the same time, it was time for Krishna to appear. Krishna appears once in the day Brahma, which is 1,000 cycles of yugas is one day Brahma. So if you think of the four yugas, 4.3 million years, times 1,000, 4.3 billion years, and then Lord Brahma has a snooze for another 12 hours, another 4.3 billion years. Has a pretty serious sleep. And I think Banu Swami was saying last week that he gets pretty exhausted after the day and he has a bit of a break, like most of us do. At the end of the day, you've got to have a little rest. Anyway, so that's how often he comes. Very rare. For every 8.6 billion years, Krishna appears, and straight after him, Lord Chaitanya appears. So because of this rare and wonderful appearance, when Lord Krishna comes, he displays his wonderful Vrindavan pastimes. And he wants the devotees, the conditioned souls, to be attracted. But there's not much preaching at that time. It's pretty much, it's the perfected living entities that enter the pastimes and the eternal devotees that come with the Lord to engage, but they don't go out and preach as such. But they display the pastimes and they record it, and the future living entities like us, we can study those, hear those, and become attracted. But Caitanya Mahaprabhu wanted to go one step further. He wanted to deliver the essence of those pastimes, which is love of God, pure Krishna consciousness in the mood of the Vrajvasis, the mood of his internal, most advanced devotees in the whole creation and the highest planet of the spiritual world, to the lowest people of Kali Yuga, which is extraordinary. So this is explained in earlier chapters. So this preaching that we do is just that we're trying to give people a higher taste. What we receive. That's why it's important. It says that quote Vedanta that the best devotee is the bhajanandi who preaches, because that means we've got to be pretty fixed. Our sadhana, our hearing and chanting has to be constant every single day without fail, so that we're not affected, or not as affected as we could be by the material energy. That way when we speak, we're honest, we're speaking from our own realization and our own experience. We're not just sort of like parrots. I heard a story the other day of a lady who took you might have heard this before, a lady who took a little child to the dentist because he'd eaten too many sweets and his teeth were starting to rot. So she took him to the dentist and said to the dentist, you've got to tell him to stop eating sweets. You look at his teeth, you've got to tell. The dentist said, okay, bring him back next week and I'll tell him. She goes, what? Next week? Anyway, she took him away. She came back a week later and the dentist said, little boy, stop eating sweets. It will rot your teeth and and so stop it. The little boy said, yes, doctor, I will stop eating sweets. And the mother said, why didn't you just tell him that last week? He goes, well, actually, last week I was addicted to sweets also. So I had to give them up myself first so I could, honestly instruct this young boy. Otherwise it wouldn't be genuine. It'd just be show, false. So this is anyway, it's a simple story, but it makes the point. We've got to become genuine, and Prabhupada says here, I think, what did he say here, in the purport? Something, chant, follow the principles, and also preaching. He says, yes, we should chant and follow the principles, for the Krishna consciousness movement is based on the principle that one should become as perfect as possible in devotional service, and oneself, and also preach the cult. So we need to, whatever we do for ourselves, which would be bhajanandi, is we're actually doing it so we can give it to others. We're charging up our batteries so we can become like portable chargers. We go and meet people and they can plug into us. I remember in that seminar in Mayapur, Satyananda Maharaj, he's such a funny devotee sometimes. He was saying when you come close to a devotee that's a enthusiastic devotee, says something in their heart goes beep, jumps across to the other people and they become infected, not unknowingly or knowingly. It's like, because it says that bhakti is independent; it's not a product of karma. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that if he poses the question himself, if bhakti is a product of, not a product of karma, how do people get it? Then he answers the question, it's distributed by the Madhyamadikaris, which is the Bhajanandis, those who preach. There's three types of devotees, and the middle class devotee, because even the higher class devotees, they don't preach. They're so absorbed in but still some of those, and many of those, they step into the role of a Madhyamadikari and they discriminate and they go out and preach. So the only way that living entities can come out of this illusion of being primary enjoyers of Purush, enjoy and suffer from that consciousness, because they do suffer, because it's not natural to be the primary enjoyer. That's just not who we are constitutionally. We're tiny, minute living entities, 1/10,000th tip of hair. I think Brahmananda Prabhu asked that question to Srila Prabhupada, why did Caitanya Mahaprabhu chant that verse, that verse on humility? Because he's a supreme being, But Prabhupada answered it very interestingly. I mentioned this before. He said because Caitanya Mahaprabhu realised he was 1/10,000th tip of a hair. So because he was in the role of a devotee, of a bhakta, he wasn't in the mood of being God. So that naturally should make any of us humble if we think how small we are. I remember Bhaktivedanta Maharaj gave an example of Srimati Radharani's devotional service. She says her service is so great, it's like Mount Meru. Mount Meru, biggest mountain in the universe. He says our service, we're like a little mustard seed. It's almost no hope, you could say. But he said, no, it's not like that. It's actually, because Rupa Goswami says that Srimati Radharani is actually only a devotee. And everyone else is the devotee of a devotee of a devotee of a devotee of Srimati Radharani. So she's actually the real devotee. And so then he said, so it's actually, because we serve through the mercy of Srimati Radharani, it becomes a mustard seed and Mount Meru. So it becomes, you're adding. You're adding. And he used the example of, at a meal, you have the big main meal, but then you have the little things on the side, little condiments, a bit of pinch of salt, whatever, and that adds to that big meal, It's in our own little way, that little service that we render is valuable and unique. Even though we're insignificant, we're unique. And Srila Jiva Goswami says that each living entity has a unique relationship with Krishna that nobody else has, and Krishna misses that. So we've actually got something, I've mentioned this many times, but I think it's important to hear it. Even though you could say, well, I'm just at 1/10,000th of a tip of a hair, I'm a mustard seed, or I'm a mustard seed skin, I'm useless. But no, that we have, because Krishna is Atmaram, he's supreme enjoyer, but also he's increasing his enjoyment. And the way he increases his enjoyment by more living entities, rendering loving service to him in various ways. So much variety. So we have a unique individual relationship with Krishna nobody else has, It's not like we're a bunch of clones, We get stamped out of the factory and bhakta, bhakta, bhakta. And we're all Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. We're not robots, we're individual living entities, and we have, and relationships, when you do the figures, Srila Prabhupada, I play with maths sometimes, I like counting things and working things out. Srila Prabhupada uses the three modes of material nature. He says you multiply 3 by 3, you get 999 by 81, eventually you get to 8.4 million varieties of living entities in the material world based on different shades of the three modes material nature. So every body being in the material universe is a combination, influence of these three modes in such a subtle way that it's great. It's like with colours. When you mix the three primary colours, you can end up with so many different shades of colours, and unlimited really in ones. But in the spiritual world, it is actually unlimited, because you have the 5 primary rasas and the 7 secondary rasas, types of relationships. And when you blend, because we've only got from 1 to 10, but if you go from 1 to 12 and do the sums, it becomes infinite. So it's possible for an infinite amount of living entities to have a different blend of ras, a relationship with God. So that's very exciting for us humble sadhakas. We've got, in our little way, we've got something we can offer the Lord. We just have to become purified so we can relate to the Lord, because Krishna relates to the jivas on the level of pure devotional service. That's the communication via medium. So we've got to come up to that consciousness of pure devotion, that state of pure devotional service, and then we can offer that loving service to the Lord and increase His pleasure. That extra condiment or little chutney will come on board, that perhaps wasn't there for some time. So, and Krishna takes great pleasure. And Srimati Radharani also takes great pleasure, because that's one of her main services, is bringing living entities. And the pleasure in the spiritual world is completely opposite of that of the material world. It's explained in Madhya Lila, chapter 8, a wonderful conversation with Ramananda Roy, the Caitanya Caritamrita, that when the gopis see the enjoyment of Srimati Radharani, they enjoy 100 times more what she's enjoying. It's quite extraordinary. So the more further you set back in devotional service as a servant of the servant, and you're facilitating the service of the divine couple, you enjoy more and more. And then it's explained in that same section, when Srimati Radharani, she brings others forward to enjoy with Krishna. She wants to see others. She wants to increase Krishna's variety of pleasure. She enjoys 10 million times more. It's interesting, huh? So there's more pleasure in being a secondary enjoyer than being a primary enjoyer. It's a natural state of the soul. So if we can remember that in our practice of Krishna consciousness, that Krishna is the Bhoktaram Jagatapasham, He's the Bhokta, the supreme enjoyer of everything, not us, Him. He's the only one. Even in this chapter with the Panchatattva, even all the members of Panchatattva, with 2 of them are Vishnu Tattva, they also take the mood of service. And Nityananda Prabhu, Advaitacharya went to great trouble to become the servant, because he's very senior, he's 50 years older than Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, but he had to go and spurt out Mayavad philosophy to get chastised by Chaitanya and become subservient to him. He wanted to become his servant. Gadara Pandit service and Srivasa also, and even Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, God himself wants to become the servant. He wants to try it out, and that's explained in chapter 4. He wants to experience what Radharani is experiencing. He can see she's getting something from seeing him, serving him, that I'm not getting. He wants to try that. He comes in the mood of Srimati Radharani. So even God himself, who's the Purush, wants to become the secondary enjoyer. It's a very interesting philosophy. We're all fighting out there to become primary and just falling flat on our faces and struggling. Everything that we do just falls apart. Eventually his bodies rot. We've got to throw them, we've got to burn the damn things, because they start to. No one wants to keep the body after the soul leaves, It's not it's, I love you, you die, I'm going to keep you in my cupboard. No one does that, right? Because your neighbours would be wondering what smells coming out of your window. So it doesn't work. It's not possible for the living entity to enjoy matter. Oil and water don't mix. So it's not possible. We've tried it and we've tried it and we've tried it, God knows out for how long, and we're still stuck in these, bags of stool and pus and God, what else is inside of them. Cover with a nice layer of skin, so we go, he looks pretty good, she looks pretty good. But man, you've been sucked in, I tell you, you've been conned. It's not so good, and we know that, If you smell yourself when you get up in the morning, it's not a very good smell, everything smells. You got to quickly scrub up, and the French invented perfume because they didn't have bathrooms. Because imagine they must have stunk. It's explained, I think Louis IV, whatever, had crust on his skin from the dirt and filth. Such a horrid mode of ignorance living. And I think the Palace of Versailles is it's massive. It has like something like 200 rooms and no bathrooms. You know, so I don't know what the hell they were doing. But anyway, I guess they invented perfume. And now we have very wonderful scented oils that we can offer the Lord. So Prabhupada mentioned this at the end of the purport, that we have to learn to dovetail and engage everything in Krishna service. He quotes that verse that, that last line's famous, Nibbandha Krishna Sambandhe Yukta Vairagam Uchate. And he says through the Bhaktisiddhanta advisors that one discuss these verses, how to utilise everything in Krishna service. So that's the end of the purport, and he quotes this verse from the 10th canto. He says this verse and this verse from Nectar Devotion should be discussed. And the one from the 10th canto is from the Rasa Leela. That's when Sukadeva Goswami said we should imitate great personalities like Lord Shiva and go and drink poison and imitate Krishna with the gopis. No, we shouldn't imitate. We should actually become followers of these great devotees, not imitate them. You know, I've gone a long time. I apologise for that. If anyone wants to comment or add something, Maharaj? Maharaj is such a great example for God knows how many decades. You've been doing exactly this, going out and travelling, especially in your younger days when you weren't burdened down by the GBC responsibilities. That's where you had your buses. And when I was a brahmachari, I was always hanging out to get on the bus because I was a reasonable picker. They never would let me go on the bus. So sometimes we would go on travelling Sankirtan, which we call travel on Kaleba. We would find out where the bus was and go there. And I remember one time you were down the south coast and you went to Bateman's Bay, and the devotees would travel on bus, an advanced party with higher halls, and they'd put on a wonderful program, Kirtan, Prashadam, and make devotees, you know, and spread Krishna consciousness all over us, up and from Western Australia up to Cairns, right? You would go practically. And Maharaj was so in sync. He always, somehow or other, always end up in Cairns in the middle of winter, right? He followed the sun. Here comes the sun. But so one time you were in Bateman's Bay, and we were there travelling alongside you, and we're waiting for the program people to come, waiting at the 6 o'clock program, 6:30, nobody there, 6:40, and you said at 7, no one comes, we're digging into it. There's all this Prashadam. Venugopal cooked all these curd steaks. I still remember the curd steaks from that particular wonderful Prashadam. And then 7 o'clock, Sarira Vijaja, woo! So, secondary enjoyers, of course. We're enjoying Krishna to enjoy before. So we're taking the remnants of the Lord Gauranga Mahaprabhu. And it was potent because it was cooked for his pleasure and for the preaching, you know, so it was very enjoyable. And then a couple of days later on, you move on to Marimbula. And same thing. Now, the difference there at 6 o'clock, there was 200 people there. I remember that night, it was packed. Marimbula was packed. I remember I had to rush back to the bus, we had to cook a second feast because there wasn't going to be enough. So, yeah, wonderful, you know, somehow if we could have that again, the devotees could experience the joy of travelling and preaching. You know. Anyway, I'm talking too much again. Anyway, Maharaj is a great example. Isn't it? Yeah, you relish those days, didn't you?
I remember when they cooked that
hang on,
feast.
Take the mic.
They cooked this huge feast. No one's turned up.
Yeah, do you remember that Bateman's Bay?
What am I going to do with this? What are we going to do with this big feast? All the buddies gathered around and said, "Don't worry, man, we'll take it."
We'll take it. And we did, you know.
And they did.
They did. Sometimes you have to surrender. You've got to take a bit more than normal. What to do? Anybody else? Because I've got 2 minutes.
So is the devotee's best preaching his personal example? We've heard St. Francis of Assisi in the past, he said always preach and when needed speak.
That's correct.
And we've seen, you know, in Prabhupada memory, I'm sure Ramaswamy would know some of his godbrothers and sisters. When they first met Srila Prabhupada, he didn't have to say anything. They just, as soon as they see him, they're just like, I'm going to give him my life. I'm going to serve Prabhupada for the rest of my life just by seeing him before he even spoke. Yeah. So it's definitely a personal example.
Absolutely. Yeah, you've got to become like the dentist. You've got to give up the sweets before you tell the kids to give up the sweets. But it's very important. Prabhupada said my disciples will be recognised as being perfect ladies and gentlemen. You know, so it's important when we go out in the public, even just normal dealings. You know, have nice transactions, good manners, and people will think that was a very nice lady or man or whatever. And Prabhupada says if they think favourably of the devotees, they make spiritual advancement. But if we do the opposite and act like a bunch of galahs and carry on and do something stupid or be rude, then they're going to think, they're going to think the opposite and perhaps commit an offence by criticising. So it's important that we behave, we practice and we behave properly, and we'll be able to influence people in that way. Better stop. Is that right? Jai Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Sri Caitanya Caritamrita ki jai. Hare Krishna.